The world seems to be falling apart, but tell my listeners about defense priorities and what you advocate for and what you do there first.
Yeah, I was so thrilled to get to join Defense Priorities almost at its inception in 2015 is when I or 2016 is when I joined the team. Basically, it is trying to be a counter to those who say we should intervene everywhere all the time, and really, and those who on the other side who say we shouldn't do anything anywhere. We fill in a space that it wasn't filled by anyone at the time, which is we want a strong national defense. We are all about defending America and having, the proper amount of funding and a well-trained force, but we are for using it only when our needs are or when our nation is put at risk and when it's threatened, when, the absolute last resort and only for our safety, not for every time somebody doesn't like somebody abroad, they want to fire off missiles and send us into these wars that are pointless and self-destructive. So we're for I actually, instead of restraint, I say we're for a sane foreign policy and for a strong national defense.
Well, you're talking my language, sir. So somewhere there's a group of sane people in the middle between isolationism and neocons, and that would be
Exactly.
your group. So good to hear that. Question is how you keep that balance. And I personally have a very profound respect for the Constitution, and I regularly speak with Judge Napolitano on this issue because he shares my views on it.
Yeah.
The idea that there needs to be a declaration of war before we start dropping bombs in countries with whom we have no beef or no argument. I mean, we regularly cruise missile people to death. We regularly drop bombs on other countries, and I always envision this future where maybe there's a terrorist here in our country, or some other foreign government doesn't like one of our elected officials for some unknown reason, and they decide to launch one of their own attacks on him and kill one of our guys. Why? Well, because he's bad in the hearts and minds of our people. You see, the flip side of that, it's a rather frightening future.
Well, yeah, and I think there's no better example than what happened just yesterday in Baghdad. So there was somebody that we deemed was a target and somebody that needed to die. So we launched a missile to kill him and his two colleagues in the middle of downtown Baghdad. Now, there's argument that the guy was, somebody that had actually participated in the attack that killed the American troops. Terrific. Then let's go after him. Let's get with the Iraqi government and let's capture the guy. Let's take him into custody and put him on trial, whatever it needs to be. Bring him to justice for sure. But to just launch unilaterally, which the Pentagon used that term, to destroy a vehicle in the middle of downtown, what would we do if anyone anywhere in the world launched a missile and blew up a vehicle in my town here in Washington, D.C. without telling the U.S. government? Would we go, okay, well, I mean, y'all thought it was a good idea, so that's cool. We would obviously go lose our minds. So we
Yeah.
shouldn't be doing things like this to somebody else that we would never allow to be done to us.
All right. Well, let's pivot away from that. And I share your views on that. So let's pivot away from that. Let's start with our southern border. And I was very, very disappointed to see the Senate bipartisan package couple our own security with Ukraine, Israel, and funding for Taiwan and the issues we got going on in the South China Sea. Those seem to be completely separate issues, and I think they should have been voted on independently, because whether or not one believes funding should go to Ukraine or Israel, you could be on two different sides of that equation. You were
Right.
forced to vote for an entire package of billions and billions of dollars of spending across the entire globe.
Right.
That's just an untenable position to be in. So I was glad to see it got shot down. Plus, the border itself didn't get resolved because it still allowed 1.5 million immigrants to come in, and it gave President Biden an unbelievable amount of discretion of whether or not he could just keep the border open or not under any given circumstance.
Yeah,
How
so
did
I couldn't agree with you more. There are I mean we're a multifaceted country and there are a myriad of problems and issues that need to be resolved and we need to go after them independently on their own merits. And certainly there's room sometimes for package deals if you can get things that are generally supported and popular. There's no reason to have to go to every single issue has its own bill. But when it's something as diverse as this and divisive as you point out on so many different issues, I mean each one of those issues would have been hard to get passed on its own merits. But to try to package them all together just almost was, I mean, it's almost guaranteed failure, and that's kind of where we are. And of course, the downside is wherever you may fall in any one of those issues, now none of them are solved, and I don't know when they're going to get solved.
Well, it's going to have to be a change of administration, and that seems to be what I like to call the elephant in the room. Biden keeps saying he needs legal authority to do anything. He needs the law to be changed relative to immigration. He needed this Senate bill to go through so he could do something about the border, as if he cares. He flipped the switch off on border security the day he was sworn into office. You look at the numbers on your 2020 when Trump's last year, 400,000. Year later, it's a 1.5 million, and the numbers keep going up more and more. He stopped Trump policies. Does he not have the ability to flip that light switch back on, reinstate those policies, and stop the flow of illegal immigrants?
Well, look, the president of the United States, whoever is filling that office, has not the authority, but the obligation to keep our country safe. Like, here I said defense priorities, we talk about want to have a sane foreign policy. Well, I also want to have a sane domestic national security policy where we just keep the country safe. Look, I think there's tons of rooms to debate the merits of this policy, immigration policy over that one, and let legislators, bandy that about. But no matter what policies you want to have, the borders should be secure so that only people come into our country that we say should come into our country, because it's not a free for all. And as you, allude to there's millions of people that are here that are we don't even know about. We don't know who they are. We don't know what their intentions are, and that should be just absolutely unacceptable. But it seems to be acceptable, and I don't get that. I really don't.
Well, having served this great country of ours for so long, sir, on like if I had to put you on the spot and do a 1 to 10 scale, because I'm pretty close to 10 on this, the likelihood that we're going to experience some sort of large disrupting event this summer before the election at some point, terrorist cell launching, we've got tens of thousands apparently of Chinese Communist Party military age men coming across our border, which screams, how in the hell did they get from China to Mexico? That seems frightening, especially notably the Chinese Communist Party keeps very good tabs and tracks on people going in and out of their country. It's as if, we can't deny that they know that's happening, that they maybe even be behind it. Where are you in terms of the threat level we seem to be facing simply as a consequence of this millions and millions of undocumented, unknown people in our country?
Yeah, I mean, we have done a really good job on so many levels since 9/11 on cooperation between federal, state, and local law enforcement officials, the U.S. Department of Defense, on identifying any terrorist threats to the U.S. and taking actions on them before they ever materialize or before they ever get to our shores. And obviously, just looking at the number of attacks we've had, just a couple of minor ones over the last 20-something years. So there's been a lot of success there. But when you basically make your back door a screen door and so many things can come through that you don't have any control over, we don't know when it's going to come in. The reason why our anti-terrorist activities are so effective is because we're able to monitor things abroad and then control that border so you know who's coming in. But if you have literally hundreds of thousands or millions that come in and you don't know who they are, it's obvious that there's going to be the potential for some nefarious actors intentionally to come in for that purpose. Now, right now it's speculation because we don't know who they are, but the risk is high that there are some here already.
Well, my guest today, Daniel Davis, host of Daniel Davis Deep Dive podcasts and expert in foreign policy, among others. Pivoting over to Ukraine, I think it goes without saying the United States, because we are the wealthiest country the globe has ever known in the history of mankind, lots of hands in the American taxpayer cookie jar. And of course, when it comes to funding wars, it seems to me that like we're the only ones that are supposed to be responsible for waging this proxy war against Russia. Is it in our interest to do that? Should we take a pause and exhale and kind of get an assessment of whether Ukraine can even win or hold its ground against Russia? And what of the other NATO allies and countries? Are they providing sufficient aid on their own, since it seems to be more of a threat to them than to the United States? Where are you on this big, complicated issue?
Yeah, I have from months before the war been strongly advocating that the U.S., the West, in Kiev come to an accommodation the best that they can and have a negotiated settlement with Russia. And there was one that was available prior to the war. No matter what anybody in NATO wants to say now, there was always a possibility of declaring neutrality, of saying NATO was not going to come into Ukraine, and there almost certainly would never have been a war. Then, when the war started, you had in the Istanbul meetings in March and April of 2022, there was the general outlines of an agreement by both sides to end the war then along the same terms. Then that got trashed, and there hasn't been any serious one since. Militarily, there is no path to a Ukraine victory. Point blank, there is no path. So to ignore that elephant in the room reality and to continue trying to say, let's give more and more money, even though there's no strategy, there's no tactics that's going to succeed, it's an absolute waste of money. And in my view, it's an immoral position because the Ukraine people who hate the fact that they were invaded by Russia, legitimately so, we're giving them not just hope, but enough information or weapons and support to prevent complete loss. But there's no path to win. So all it does is get more Ukrainian people killed and methodically more territory lost to Russia till at some point Russia is just going to outlast the Ukraine side and their army will probably collapse because Russia can outdo them in all the categories of war. I think it's a terrible thing that we're doing.
Well, and honestly, I just get the impression, I mean, given Russia's military might relative to the size of Ukraine and Ukraine's military, even though we supplemented, that they seem to be keeping their powder dry, that they have not unleashed the full fury of the Russian army on the Ukrainian people. Is my sense accurate in your mind?
It is, and you can see how, because I can't remember the exact number of civilians that have been killed in this war. We're just about at the 2 year mark, just another week or two, and I think it's somewhere around 10-12,000 documented Ukrainian civilians that have been killed, and then you see in the Israel-Hamas war. It's close to 30,000 so far in 4 months because Israel is just, laying siege to the place and just wiping out entire sections of cities, etc. You don't see that in Russia. When Russia attacks things, primarily it's against military targets or military related targets, like some of the infrastructure and the energy infrastructure in particular. But you have seen them not attack, like say Kiev. You don't see them going after whole sections of that city, even though they have substantial missile power. And even in these cities around there, they could just be laying them to waste. But other than where the battles are fighting, like Avdiivka or Bakhmut or Mariupol, where the battles are fighting, that happens. But when you don't see them just wantonly destroying, and they could, but the fact that they're restrained shows that they don't want to just wipe out the population there. They want to win their war, but they want to leave the people in a normal state. And, that's just the reality. And some people want to say that Putin is this, manifestation of evil and all bad, but he's not filling that role in the actuality. He's filling the role of somebody who wants to win a war, but also knows he's going to have to live with his neighbor after it's over.
Well, something that's become more of a political hot potato than even the war between Ukraine and Russia is the situation in Israel, because unleashed have been all of the protesters and agitators, the pro-Palestine people, the pro-Israel folks. You have some horrific acts of terror that were unleashed on the innocent, non-uniformed Israeli population, justifying, in my mind, a strong military response, since Hamas declared war on Israel. When you declare war on a country, they're going to declare war on you, and that seems to be what's unfolding. But it's so much more complicated given this long-term situation with Israel and the two-state solution, this river to the sea argument that Palestine and the Hamas folks make. Where do you see this ending? Because Israel does not seem to be wanting to hold back at all. It's like this is their opportunity. They want to eradicate Hamas once and for all.
See, it's a little ironic that so many people in the West, just went crazy when they hear this river to the sea from the Palestinian side, but there wasn't an eyelash bat at all when Benjamin Netanyahu last month emphatically said, "We will control from the river to the sea." And that was in direct retaliation or response, rather, to President Biden saying that we insist on a two-state solution as part of this, process going forward there. Whatever the war aims are, that's got to end with a two-state solution. And then Netanyahu says, "No, we're not going to do it. We're going to rule it all." So I have a problem with a lot of this money that we're given because it is. I'll just tell you from a military perspective, from an analysis, take the emotion out of it. Israel is going down a path that cannot succeed. It doesn't matter how many people they kill. You can't kill your way to peace. I've seen our side try it in 2 decades that I was in active duty and my 4 combat deployments, and it never worked. Disastrously so in Afghanistan. We could talk about that separately. But by killing so many innocent people, and especially 11, 12,000 children, all of the people who survive in this from the Palestine, who know that they were just as innocent as those innocent Israelis that were slaughtered on the 7th of October, you have created so many more enemies and so much more hatred for Israel than ever you could destroy with Hamas, that at the end of the day, you're going to have more enemies, not less. There is no peace coming. And for the United States to turn a blind eye and let Netanyahu tell us, I'm not going to listen to you on the two-state solution, but here's $17 billion, that's counter to our own interest, and I think we should change tactics there.
Yeah, it just creates another generation of people who hate us and hate Israel, right? It's just that's the product of war and innocents dying.
Yeah, and it's such large numbers too. Like I said, it's nearly triple the number of innocents that have been killed and wounded in Israel in 4 months than in Ukraine in 2 years. Let that sink in for a second.
Wow.